The way I would describe ASL to someone who doesn't know anything about sign language or deaf culture is that it is a real language that is used by deaf people here in America. It is not English. It has its own grammar.
I would describe ASL as more of a community because you have to use your facial structure and the hands and your full body movement to convey how you interact with people.
I would describe ASL as like a language that you can use with your hands. There's no speaking. It's a language that you can use with facial expressions and your hands. There's no talking.
I would describe ASL as, or just signing as, a decent and effective way to communicate in deaf culture.
And the deaf people are a minority, so they have their own culture.
My favorite misconception is that deaf people don't listen to music. They do listen to music and they feel for rhythms and things like that.
A common misconception about deaf people is that they are lesser than hearing people. That's not true. They can do pretty much everything that hearing people can do.
Some common misconceptions about deaf people are they can't drive. That is false. Deaf people are able to drive. They may not be able to hear, but they are more visualized.
Well, people who use ASL, not everybody's deaf. Not everyone's ears are completely deaf. One side they can hear and the other side they don't.
And a common misconception about sign language would be that it is universal. There's one sign language that's used all over the world, and that's not true. Each country has their own. So we share a sign language with Canada, but Mexico and Argentina have completely different sign languages.
And also that deaf people can't speak. Some deaf people can speak full fluent English. Even whenever they're signing in, they're completely deaf.
Deaf people are able to talk. It's just they don't sound the same as hearing people because they can't hear what they're saying. So they're able to talk, but most of the time they just choose not to.
People think because they're deaf, they can read lips, but not all of them can read lips.
I actually grew up with it. It has become a part of my life. When I was little, I would use it a lot because I actually went through a moment in time where I couldn't speak.
I find ASL and deaf culture to be interesting because I learned directly from deaf people.
I find ASL and deaf culture interesting because it takes a group of people who have taken their disability and turned it into a community.
I find it interesting because it's a whole new world. Not a lot of people know about deaf people and the deaf culture. I just find it very interesting. And it's fascinating to learn more about these people who can't hear and how they live on with their life.
The only reason why I find it interesting because usually I don't talk to people a lot. So I like this. I like it when I'm in a room where it's kind of silent most of the time. So what interests me in ASL is I can speak deaf people with my hands. I like when I'm speaking to them or using my signs. I like when I use my hands as something else, that I'm describing something else. They can understand the story that I'm telling them.
I just really connected with the language. I'm pretty soft-spoken myself and kind of shy, but in sign language, I can be as bold as I want to be, and it's easier for me to just be bold in sign, which I really appreciate.
When I was younger, they had this man that lived at the end of my street, and he was deaf, and I always see him come outside and sign with his wife, but I did not know what, because I was 4. So I always been interested in it since then.
I find ASL and deaf culture interesting because of the fact that it's such a different community and it's underrepresented, and there are a lot of people that go day to day without having a source of communication with and hearing people, and so I want to be able to make that connection with other people.
So people can understand and respect deaf culture by just being mindful that deaf people are not lesser than hearing people. They're just different, and you need to communicate with them in a different way and just be more visual. Just be mindful of that and everything will be okay.
Just ask questions. I feel like there's no such thing as a dumb question. So if you're curious about something, just ask instead of being offensive or having something going unknown and you'll do something offensive down the line.
Don't, like, if they're signing, do not, like, walk through while they're signing. Like, walk through the middle of...
Just because someone is deaf doesn't mean you can bully them.
For Deaf Pride, deaf people who are culturally deaf, meaning they have grown up around other deaf people, they have a lot of pride in their deafness. And this is rooted in the bad experiences that deaf people have had throughout history. There was a period of time when sign language was banned in favor of lip reading. They had to undergo lots and lots of speech therapy that was sometimes painful. These kind of things happened in history. So when your people go through that and you come out on the other side of it okay, you develop this resilience and this pride in your identity that we made it through that, so we can do anything.
People can give deaf people more time to understand things because it's harder for people to communicate with barriers. It's just like between somebody who only knows English and only knows Spanish, you have to give them time to learn to communicate with each other.
I always think of Helen Keller, just being blind and deaf, having two disabilities. That's very challenging. She overcame both. She wrote books and she is a very famous American figure.
There's this one story where there were some deaf students in a college and one of them did not get accepted because it's a tradition where everyone who is deaf and listens to ASL, they get accepted, but apparently someone did not get accepted, and there's a whole protest when that happened.
So I would go to the Deaf Church here in Houston, and then I went to the homecoming game at the School for the Deaf in Austin, and I ran into one of the people that I recognized from the Deaf Church. As we were catching up, chatting with each other, it turned out his name was on several of the buildings at the school because he had graduated from the school and was their biggest donor. And when he had gotten to the school, he had no language. All he had was home sign, which is like made up signs that he would make up with his family at home. But then when he got to the school in Austin, they taught him actual language and sign language, and he became so successful that he made a fortune, and now he funds most of the school.
There was a moment in my life where I couldn't speak, and I would use sign language to express myself. A lot of the people there were actually using sign language a lot. And even though I was little, I was able to communicate with those people, and I found that really cool.
When this girl was little, she it was like back in like the 1800s sometime, and they did not have like sign language teachers, so she did not know how to sign, and her dad went out to like France, I think it was, and started like looking for people to like teach her sign.
90% of deaf people have hearing families. And so when most deaf people have hearing families, they are not provided with sign language access or access to deaf schools. It is only the all-deaf families that will choose that option for their children. And so the all-deaf families grow up in deaf culture with deaf pride and deaf values, and the deaf children who belong to hearing families are raised as hearing people. The deaf people tend to look at hearing people as they don't want to give sign language a chance. They just want to get their kids implant. They just want them to be like hearing people. They want them to be all the same. So I think what would help is for people to be exposed to sign language and the basics of deaf culture so that hearing families will understand that that is an option for their deaf child, and that it would help their deaf child learn how to read sooner and develop their academic skills is by using sign language at an early age. And they can also have the spoken language. They can have both of it, but don't deprive them of the sign language.